53% of Democrats in Congress don't necessarily support the kind of massive unconditional backing and aid that he's offering. So his speech was an attempt to sort of rally support behind him, not only from the American people, but from his own party.
Rishi Sunak has urged Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to help reduce tensions in the Middle East and prevent a dangerous escalation in the Israel-Gaza conflict. In talks in Riyadh, the Prime Minister urged Saudi Arabia to support regional stability. He'd travelled from Jerusalem, where his Israeli counterpart, Benjamin Netanyahu, told allies to prepare for a long war with Hamas. Rishi Sunak said he'd backed Israel's right to self-defence in line with international law. Daniel Levy was an advisor to the office of the former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Speaking to Times Radio, he said the Prime Minister's visit will do little to bring security to the region.
Israel has tried to militarily defeat Palestinians, and it has gotten us to precisely this place. So I think you're not being a friend. I understand the optics. I understand, look, there's a community of people, I include myself amongst them, who care deeply about Israel in this country. There is also a community of people, I happen to include myself amongst them as well, who care deeply about the fate of the Palestinians.
Meanwhile, President Biden has been addressing the American people overnight from the Oval Office. He outlined his plans to continue funding military assistance for Israel and Ukraine.
American leadership is what holds the world together. To put all that at risk if we walk away from Ukraine, if we turn our backs on Israel, it's just not worth it. I'm going to send to Congress an urgent budget request to fund America's national security needs. It's a smart investment that's going to pay dividends for American security for generations.
Well, the Egyptian government has confirmed that an initial convoy of 20 trucks carrying humanitarian aid will be allowed to enter Gaza through the Rafah crossing today. It comes after mounting pressure from United Nations bodies such as the World Health Organization and the UN Population Fund. Well, let's cross live now to Tel Aviv and speak to Allison Kaplan Sommer, a journalist at Haaretz. Morning, Allison.
Good morning.
What do you make of President Biden's comments overnight, first of all?
Well, they were consistent with what he said when he was in Israel, offering unconditional support for Israel's right to defend itself. But, there's subtext in what Biden is saying and how close the Americans are to the situation. Israel is in a bear hug from the United States on one hand, getting this kind of massive support. The support took another dimension last night when there appeared to be a missile launch from Yemen towards Israel, and the United States intercepted those missiles. But the strong message of support coming from Biden also comes with some close supervision of what Israel's doing, making sure that it doesn't cross any lines. Biden is doing this not with complete support from his Democratic Party. There was a poll yesterday and showed that 53% of Democrats in Congress don't necessarily support the kind of massive unconditional backing and aid that he's offering. So his speech was an attempt to sort of rally support behind him, not only from the American people, but from his own party.
Yeah, as you mentioned, of course, the president has been in the Middle East this week. Also in the Middle East currently, Rishi Sunak, UK Prime Minister. He's been urging Saudi Arabia to prevent the conflict escalating. How important are the Saudis in all of this, Alison?
Well, they're key. They're a key factor in the nation, and they're a huge influence across the Arab world, which we know, especially after that controversial missile attack, the hospital that exploded the day that Biden arrived, and there were huge riots and demonstrations across the Arab world. So there's a feeling if there is some sort of calming of the waters in terms of the attitude towards Israel, coming from the Saudis, that will have some sort of an influence. It's questionable whether it will, but hopefully it will. And I think that no one wants to see the hope, the chance of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel that was flickering and that seemed around the corner just before this conflict broke out, as completely dying and not being able to come back.
That's an interesting point. Where do you see that now, Alison? Do you think that's completely off the table for the time being?
I don't think it's completely off the table. First of all, everything's off the table while this war is raging. So we're going to have to see how things settle. But there is, there's a lot of speculation that the prospect of Saudi normalization was a factor in not in the planning of this horrible, murderous, outrageous attack by Hamas, but that perhaps the prospect of a normalization with Saudi Arabia going around the issue of the Palestinians was what triggered Hamas to do it at this time, with or without the encouragement of Iran, which is its proxy, their proxies or their sponsors of Hamas, whether or not it was a direct order. People are saying that Iran definitely bought the pistol for Hamas and did the training as to how to shoot the pistol. The question of whether it actually gave an order to fire in launching this attack and launching this war is a question. But if it did, to the extent that it did, it's believed that the prospect of an alliance across the Gulf together with Israel as a threat to the Iranians was a reason that this happened now.
And just finally, Allison, the Israeli defense minister has told troops reportedly to get ready to see Gaza from the inside. When do you expect the ground invasion of Gaza to begin in earnest?
It might have already begun if we hadn't had this stream of world leaders coming into Israel. You don't want to launch a massive ground war when President Biden or the British Prime Minister Sunak is in Israel. Ground forces are massed around Gaza. It's definitely a question of time as to when they go in. There are a lot of strategy is going into it. Obviously, it's not going to be a surprise, but trying to maximize the right time. And it's an assessment of the Israeli military. It wants to soften the ground, soften the targets as much as possible for when the ground forces go in order to minimize casualties of IDF soldiers. And then there is this call for Gazan civilians to move from the north, where most of the targets of the Israeli assault will be, to the south in order to, as much as possible, minimize civilian casualties on the ground in Gaza, even though we do have a looming humanitarian crisis, and there have already been 3,785 Gazans killed since the beginning of the war, according to Hamas.